I had a unique childhood growing up. The food had to have sugar in it. Just this very large breakfast. I felt totally different. My head exploded. She said, you keep talking about something called a meal. What's a meal? I saw her gain and lose 75 pounds like 3 times.
They're eating in fight and flight. They get wrecked by caffeine. This is the person who gets jittery. They also can be more sensitive to cannabis and marijuana. And then they also can really tank on a glass of wine.
I can't eat breakfast in the morning. I'm so nauseous. Well, then I know they really need to be eating breakfast because they're a T-type, because their blood sugar is low.
It is 9 out of 10 times brings radical improvements to headaches, to mood, to skin rashes, to fatigue, to brain fog, attention deficit. All right, back with head of the Roots and Branches Nutrition Department, and really kind of a bolder icon here. I think of people like you and Brigitte Mars and some of the people who've just really grounded our community in health and wellness and nutrition and lifestyle, and why people love coming to Boulder and trying to reclaim their health a little bit. And today we're going to talk about fuel.
Yes.
And food as fuel, and all things nutrition in regards to food for brain health, for body health, for exercise, for fitness. And for those of you who are new to Erin Livers, she and I are dear friends and colleagues, and we met 19 years ago when I applied to teach at Seven Bowls, and that's when we talked about revitalized digestion. We kind of talked about all that. But Erin and I really bonded over blood sugar. And that was our first bond, right? Yeah. And I have to give a shout out to Johanna Riley, where I did my residency. You come out of naturopathic medical school and you just aren't experienced, even though you've done reps with patients in clinic. And 2 things literally saved my ability to help people and think one day I could get better as a doctor. And that's understanding blood sugar and the body types. And we are going to talk all about this 1982 special that's here, right. The Body Type Diet Lifetime Nutrition Plan. But my experience has been blood sugars participate in every single blood sugar problem, and fuel problems participate in every single symptom known to human physiology. So whether it's a headache or an eczema or an asthma or a GI issue or dementia or heart disease, fuel is always part of the problem. Food is always part of the problem, but steady fuel is an American problem.
Definitely.
Tell us your perspective on blood sugar and how you got to be the blood sugar queen.
Wow. Going back, because I really feel like that was one of the things that stood out for me when I first started as a nutritionist, is I had a unique childhood growing up. My parents were quite young, so my grandparents played a big role in my growing up. And one side of my grandparents were farmers and had grown up as farmers, very invested in just farming and creating wonderful food. I mean, we would sit down to the table of 12, 15 relatives, and everything on the table was grown by my grandfather, except for his good German rye bread that he absolutely loved. And on the other side of my grandparents was my grandmother, who was a candy maker. And I saw her gain and lose 75 pounds like 3 times, early on. And she really saw food as love, but the food had to have sugar in it. She just had an amazing sweet tooth. And so seeing this growing up, and when my mom went to work when I was in 5th grade, I was tasked with cooking dinner. And my sister was in 3rd grade, and so we would take turns. So my 3rd grade sister, what was she, 8? At that time, it was her night to make dinner. I wasn't going to help her. So she had to do it on her own. And sometimes when I talk to my clients, they don't even feel like their kids are capable of setting the table. And I just feel like I've come from such a different world of eating breakfast, lunch, snack, and dinner every day. Now, my body type, which is the same as your body type, we both come at our day knowing we have to have a big meal before we leave the house, or our whole day is just going to be dragging along.
That hypoglycemic, actually, what I feel is I get actually really almost like a caffeine energy for about 2-3 hours. And then right around 10:30, 11 in the morning, I go, wah, wah. And then I get a bigger hypoglycemic hangover in the afternoon. And then my CGM will even show at 3 in the morning just from missing breakfast.
Right.
It's dropping again.
Yes, absolutely.
And we'll talk about the difference between that and carnivore and intermittent fasting and all that stuff. But for our body type, which we'll break down today a little bit, if you miss that substantial breakfast, doesn't need to be huge, it needs to be balanced.
Right.
Right. You're
and
toast.
That's right. I learned I was toast when I would get up in the morning, and to go to grade school, I would have Carnation instant breakfast, or I would have a package of, really. This is the 60s now. Or I'd have a packet of Quaker instant oatmeal. I loved the cinnamon apple flavor.
I remember when the cinnamon apple came out.
Sugar.
That was revolutionary.
Yes, absolutely. But oh my gosh, did I pay for it? And I didn't get it, so I still had Cap'n Crunch and, still had those kinds of breakfasts. But I did begin to notice, and it got in, that if I had eggs and bacon and toast and, just this very large breakfast, I felt totally different. And I wouldn't collapse, basically, through the rest of my school day. So what I saw when I first started as a nutritionist was my clients weren't eating regular meals. They were skipping meals. They were eating all sugar for breakfast. And I just thought, how can you function? So it literally just became my mission. I'm going to get you functional just by eating regularly and getting the sugar out and increasing the quality of your food and eating balanced meals. And I would often use the example back then of, we're going to eat just like your mom was June Cleaver. And she was feeding you breakfast at the table, and then you would get your after school snack and, a nice dinner with the family. But what I learned from my clients was that they didn't get that growing up. They didn't have that education. So they didn't have a foundation to build with their nutrition and their blood sugar balance. And on top of that, sometimes their dinner table was World War III. So they didn't have the,
They're eating in fight and flight.
Right, exactly. They didn't have healthy relationships. And that didn't translate into a healthy relationship with food for them. So we can go from how I grew up to me having a client who once asked me 20 minutes into a first appointment, she said, you keep talking, I just have this question. You keep talking about something called a meal. I don't know what you mean. What's a meal?
Wow.
And just, my head exploded. And
it's so good because I grew up in my dad's butcher shop, right? And he was an Austrian trained butcher. We had a smokehouse and a bologna kitchen, and not everything was organic or grass fed, but it was all real food.
Yes.
It was all real food, and my fridge was always stocked with cold cuts and vegetables, and there was always, real food available. And then we had a little bit, I remember the Cinnamon Toast Crunch when that came out. Like that was, whoa. But it was, 80-90%. Even if it was on gluten, I brought a real bread sandwich with an apple and with, some carrots or whatever. And you're right, you can't project your own experience on your clients, on your patients, because sometimes it could be the most gorgeous meal, but mom and dad were in total tension. Yeah. Or they're in massive debt and not, it's just all this stuff that translates through the food table. Real quick, Dr. Casey, an ND out of Golden, just gave a fantastic Colorado Association of Naturopathic Doctors presentation on autonomic nervous system. And she said for the youth, she brought this data that showed the most predictive thing of their success is family dinner.
Oh,
And
yes.
that blew my mind because we hit family dinner like 3-4 nights a week. And that's because we have basketball practice and parkour and, you know, all kinds of stuff. Everyone's everywhere. And it gets harder when they're in high school, especially if you're in sports or band or something.
Sure.
But we're like, I heard that and I told Sarah, I was like, we got to get back to these meals. And we all feel it. Like even the kids, once it's consistent, like everyone enjoys connecting and locking in.
Yeah.
You know, and fortunately, I'm in a marriage where my wife is an incredible chef. She likes to cook. Ozzy, our younger, has adopted a lot of that. And then these kids, if you get them on the right path, they actually start coming up with all these cool ways to do a steak on Instagram and so on and so forth. But are you a culture more of a European style where the meal, or even Central America or South America, where the meal has more meaning than Americans tend to give it?
Right.
You know?
So I did see through that lens with my clients.
Yeah.
And the other lens I was looking through that I did not realize until you introduced me to body typing. So my lens was, I'm a T type or a thyroid body type, which needs breakfast, lunch, snack, and dinner very regularly every day. But I was projecting that onto all of my clients and didn't realize that some of my clients with different body types, an adrenal body type or a gonadal body type or even a pituitary body type, they have different needs in terms of the macronutrient balance in their meals, the regularity of their meals, or the timing of their meals. And so once I learned the beauty of that body typing system that you introduced me to, it made a big difference for me. And yet the same basic rules apply to blood sugar balance, which is regular meals, balanced meals, and eating throughout the day.
Yeah, and for our listeners, this is the book that Erin is referencing, and in my residency with Johanna Riley and Janine. And what was interesting is I was a thyroid, then we had an A type, and then we had a P type in the clinic.
They're rare.
They're rare, and they're totally unique and clairvoyant when they're on their body type plan, but when they're not, they can feel unraveled, just like the T type can get dramatic, and it's not just hangry. It's also agitation and irritable and attention deficit disorder and depression and fatigue. It's not just hangry, right? It's all the H's. And I showed you guys this book, and there should be a caveat emptor. I love this book. It has helped me change so many patients' lives. But two things: it was written in the 80s,
right? And
there's some fat shaming language in the body type quiz. We were there. The 80s were freaking awesome, and they were brutal. But if you give this to a young person, you're gonna be like, "This is so not PC." Yeah, I get it. We were there. And number two is this was before the neuroinflammatory aspects of gluten were published. So sometimes when he's recommending a complex carb, he'll say couscous, which is a gluten-derived.
Or toast or bread. So it does have a lot of gluten and dairy.
So we tell people it's a concept book, right? And we're kind of working with the Adrenal camp to maybe do a 2.0 version of this at some point and really bring some polishing to develop research. But Elliot D. Abravanel is a juggernaut, and he was the lead MD at the Maharishi Institute of all of Europe, and that's the traditional Ayurvedic medicine. So like the head traditional medicine of India, just like traditional Chinese medicine, he was the lead medical doctor there, and he really dove into the Kapha, Vata, Pitta body typing, and then he merged that with the endomorph, ectomorph, mesomorph, Western biochemical body typing. And he came up with a easier way. Because I love Ayurveda, but sometimes you're splitting hairs so much, you're missing the big picture sometimes, unless you're some super experienced practitioner that can dive into the weeds and bring it back up. but it's the concept. And then he opened a weight loss clinic in San Diego. And that's where he was like medical doctor style weight loss. So he was seeing thousands of patients in kind of a rapid manner. And he's got this big capacity to notice, oh my gosh, all the pituitaries crave dairy. All the thyroid body types crave sweets and caffeine. All the adrenals like their fat and salt and their cheese. And here comes the G type, thin top, larger bottom, right, booty. And they want their spices. They're sensual eaters. They're also very nurturing and ooh la la, but also make these great mother goose moms, right? So it's fascinating to have like had him kick off the party, but then you really refined a lot. And for our listeners, why this changed our practice, and I think both me and Erin's lives, is it honored biochemical individuality. And you're not just seeing Mongolians all day in America, right?
Right.
You're seeing Mongolians who mixed with Brits, who mixed with Africans, who mixed with the genes are already a little different throughout China, but you get to the States and it's the true ultimate awesome melting pot. And that means you need some big picture concepts to sort out, should you be an intermittent faster? Could you be a healthy vegan? You absolutely should trial carnivore for a while. And how do you do carnivore? And so on and so forth. And for people like Joe Rogan, Huberman, Peter Attia, a lot of on the male kind of bro health side, those guys are all adrenal body types.
That's right.
And they would all be chunkers if they ate like a thyroid body type. And they do extraordinarily well on intermittent fasting.
Yes.
But the problem is then they project that onto the world.
That's right.
And I love all three of those guys. I think they've done so much good, like get empowered and get some self-awareness and get working out again and all that good stuff. But if you're T-type, if you're you or me and you're trying to tag along with your A-type buddy on the intermittent fasting, and then we go to jiu-jitsu at 8 a.m., I'm exhausted and nauseous. So I think this book has been so nice to validate. The other day we had a G-type and she's like, you validated my inner knowing. And I was like, yes, you were right. Yes. And a lot of times we just need to polish that a little bit, right? But for her to have an apple in the morning totally made it so she could go for a walk.
Yes.
And she needed that thyroid lift.
And her whole family was pushing eggs and bacon on her in the morning and thinking that she's ruining her health by eating an apple when that's just the perfect breakfast for her.
Yeah. So it was a fascinating read. But could you give some examples of how the body types would apply to fuel? Like the most common are the adrenal body type, which Chinese medicine would say excess, right? You're hypertensive, hypertriglyceridemia, you're pre-diabetic, metabolic syndrome looking, more stout, a Denver Bronco lineman.
That's exactly the example I used. Denver Bronco lineman.
Yep.
That's an adrenal body type to the nth degree where you're really seeing it in public and seeing their body and seeing their performance. And perhaps they want to throw a rack of ribs on the grill for the weekend, but that isn't the best diet for them. So those adrenal body types do better with delayed breakfast, smaller breakfast. Their metabolisms don't get going with a lot of fat and protein in the morning, so they're not able to really digest and metabolize that kind of a heavy diet.
Or get ripped.
Right? Yes.
When they do their bacon and eggs, I mean, it's if you're a Denver Bronco, don't eat the way the book says. You need that extra 100 pounds for a couple more years in the league, right? But then when you want to get healthy afterwards, they really make brilliant intermittent fasters.
They do, right? Yeah. Because that delayed breakfast, that small breakfast, a moderate lunch, and then a big dinner works well for them. And that's one of the mistakes I see a lot of adrenal body types doing is they're not having that large dinner. So then they're really not able to do whether it's intermittent fasting or even just get by on a smaller breakfast in the morning, which is ideal for their metabolism. So at every meal, they've got to dial that in.
They got to dial it in. And it's so important to, if you test as an A-type, to realize your ability to digest fat and protein, to digest a rack of ribs, to digest salmon, doesn't turn on until 5 p.m.
Right.
And right at dinner time. Your digestive fire stinks until 5 to 6 p.m. So it's no to light breakfast, no to light lunch, moderate to more substantial dinner, depending on your activity level, right? Like if you're just doing a desk job and it's time to get out of your desk and go do, some pickleball or some CrossFit after work or something like that. They also work out, as a generalization, the best in the evening. So it's interesting to see them get stuck in the mud on weight loss when they're swimming in the pool at 6 a.m. and then you go, sorry if this doesn't work with the family calendar, but swim in the pool at 6 p.m.
Yes.
And part of that is because they're already prone to cortisol spiking. And cortisol cuts glycogen into glucose and spikes your glucose. You get an exaggerated insulin response, and now you're a pre-diabetic insulin-resistant metabolic syndrome.
Right.
And all you need to do is intermittent fast or quasi-intermittent fast throughout the day. Have a nice balanced meal. If you're going to do fat and protein, do it at dinner. And then maybe check out where your workouts are best. But a lot of A-types, really their metabolism, that last 20 pounds of inflammatory weight they want to lose, doesn't shift until their workout time shifts.
Interesting, yeah. And they do better with lighter proteins.
They do.
Poultry, fish, seafood is fine for them on the animal side, but they also do well with plant proteins.
Yeah.
So that combination for them of the lighter proteins works better.
Yeah, they're, words that you would consider stocky, when they put weight, they put it through their whole chest and tummy, whereas you and I will get more the little love handle tire, right? But we'll still have thin wrists and ankles. The body types are a trip when you wrestle or roll jiu-jitsu or you do Muay Thai or kickboxing, because you'll go to grab a wrist and you go, oh, T-type, thin, lanky, swan-like, delicate, cover of Vanity Fair model, even though you're totally agitated and irritable. And then you go to grab A-type's wrist, and it's like an oak tree, even if it doesn't look like the silhouette, there's a density to them.
Sure.
And I go, oh, shh.
Yes. I was going to say, maybe you would want to sign up to, have matches with other T-types.
Oh, absolutely. Or as long as you know the body type, you know the pros and cons to that body.
Right. Good for you.
Yeah. So as we were saying, the A-type is the Denver Bronco lineman. The T-type is the wide receiver. So I'm not going to get in a fight with them because I can run away.
Right. Or the elite runner.
Yes, or the elite runner.
Yes.
And I'm the elite runner because most of our boulder triathletes are thin, lanky T-types, and they actually should do less triathlons and more weightlifting.
Yes.
They need substance.
Absolutely.
Whereas our A-type should do more cardio and less weightlifting, but we all love to show off our athletic narcissism, which means I have this God-given ability to deadlift, and I'm an A-type, so I'm gonna go show you how much I can lift. And I'm like, you just did that out of the womb. You didn't train or earn anything. Whereas the thin, lanky can just run until they get that, particularly the female triad of infertility and osteopenia, osteoporosis, and then you can have some of those depressive, fatigue, exhaustion.
Yeah, it's those people that are underweight and just feel like I can never gain weight. I can never get ahead.
Yep. Dangerous place to go through cancer and chemo radiation. You have no substance.
Right.
Yeah. So the A-type, the excess body type. What happens when the T-type tries to do intermittent fasting?
Right. So we talked about our own experiences of skipping breakfast. Yeah. And that's what I see a lot of T-types doing, is trying to intermittent fast. And I actually read a study that said that they were getting better results on intermittent fasting with skipping dinner or moving dinner earlier in the day instead of skipping breakfast. And I wonder how many T types were in that study because the T types they need to get up out of bed and immediately start eating. That works better for the thyroid body type. I like to say they need dinner for breakfast, dinner for lunch, snack, and dinner for dinner. Because we think about breakfast in this country and we think about pastries and oatmeal and things like that. That is not going to work for a T type. They really need dinner for breakfast. So I'm recommending meat, vegetables, something starchy, really good balance, hearty, and then maybe they have a little fruit on the side. They don't do well with a lot of fruit throughout the day. So they don't do well with fruit or sugar, and caffeine just destroys them. So someone who's trying to get through the day with a little caffeine because they've intermittent fasted and skipped breakfast, they're just not gonna have a brain
just
to function.
To reiterate what you just said, they get wrecked by caffeine. This is the person who gets jittery. This is the person who gets like cracked out on, a double shot. They also can be more sensitive to cannabis and marijuana. These are the people who get the blood sugar swings and the paranoia and the anxiety. And then they also can really tank on a glass of wine. Right? So even if you're a T type and it's your 1 day a week, we're going to have a glass of wine, have it with a steak and a huge thing of greens and maybe some squash, tons of fat on that dinner.
Absolutely.
So that you're at least accommodating some of that what goes up must come down crash.
Right. Well, and you mentioned CGMs earlier. So one of the big mysteries that gets solved when you throw a CGM on someone, especially a T type, is we see that they just make it through the day. They're not eating quite the right breakfast. They're going too long without eating. They're having ups and downs because once blood sugar starts to crash, they're like, well, I need something sweet. So then they're spiking and then crashing again. But they're just barely making it through the day. Everything looks okay, even though I know they're white-knuckling it in terms of having good, steady fuel. And then we see the CGM overnight. And it just crashes.
We're talking 52 on blood sugar.
Exactly.
And, for our listeners, functional hypoglycemia is blood sugar less than 80. Right? Pathological is less than 65. And then the ER finally starts caring about you when you're less than 50 and you're kind of dead, right? The ER doesn't care if you get fired from your job or, you can't file your tax papers because you're so brain dead from hypoglycemia. Right. But you'll see these CGMs tank like that. And the word we use for a lot of our T types is metronomic eating. Right. And it's breakfast, lunch, mid-afternoon snack, dinner, breakfast, lunch, mid-afternoon snack, dinner. And what I tell T types is when you miss that breakfast, which should be, and the T type also needs that balanced plate, right? Healthy fats, animal protein, because you need dietary cholesterol as a T type.
Absolutely.
It's mandatory, right? Preaching to the choir here.
Your body just doesn't make the amount of cholesterol that an A type does.
Yeah. And then you need that complex carb, that slow burn carb, a squash, a plantain chip. But if you miss breakfast, you don't feel it at 10 a.m. You really feel it at 3 p.m. And you start watching 5-hour energy drink commercials thinking you need caffeine. That cracks you out more. And then you really crash on that CGM in the morning.
I know.
3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m.
Right.
And then now your sleep sucks.
Yes.
Right. And that's because you had a hypoglycemic attack on your brain. And your brain went, ugh! And now you woke up thinking, oh, I'm worried about the whole world and everything and little Timmy and actually, no, all that happened is your brain freaked out. Because it ran out of fuel and it's scary.
Cortisol tried to save you.
And cortisol tried to save you.
Yes. And you can't fall asleep after that.
So that's a prelude to one of the biggest things you teach our T types, which is I'm not going to eat breakfast. I'm nauseous in the morning. Can you share that explanation? Yes.
So one of the symptoms of having low blood sugar is loss of appetite. So if my blood sugar is consistently going low, I may not feel like eating, which is unfortunate because that's exactly what you need to do. But it goes from all the way from I don't really feel like eating to let's not even talk about food. Food sounds horrible to me. To let's really not talk about food because I'm so nauseous I can't think about eating.
Yep.
And that is a road that people go down to the lower their blood sugar.
Yeah.
So what I have observed is a lot of my T types say, well, I can't eat breakfast in the morning. I'm so nauseous. Well, then I know they really need to be eating breakfast because they're a T type, because their blood sugar is low. And so my best recommendation really is I want you to get up. I want you to make a big breakfast, the kind of breakfast that you as a T type really need to eat. But you just eat whatever amount of it feels right for you because they're so nauseous.
Yep.
I don't want them to force feed themselves, but they're going to get up and really start creating that routine of making the big breakfast, eating breakfast. And so day 2, day 3, they're eating a little bit more of it. By day 4, they might be eating the whole breakfast, and now they're starting to feel better. Day 3, the nausea might have gone away. They're still kind of food averse, but they're not feeling nauseous anymore. So it can take 5 days or less for someone to really get beyond that nausea and really even out blood sugar because breakfast makes such a difference.
So a funny Erin story on that is one of my patients came in. This was in the old office. This was like 10 years ago. And they're like, Erin told me to wake up and shove an egg in my mouth. And I remember what you did. If you can tolerate eggs, what you did for this person, because the T-type has to eat within 20 to 30 minutes of waking. I mean, it's like a shower and you need to be eating, right? And when they're feeling that mild nausea, they still want to push it out.
Sure.
Right? And you said, I want you to hard-boil some eggs, and this person would have 6 to a dozen eggs, like meal plan, like on a Sunday. And then they would just wake up and put an egg in their mouth. Then they could get going with the rest of a balanced breakfast. But they needed that rescue that quick. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned from doing grand rounds with you on cases is about 2 days to 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And just like we were talking on another podcast, if you really are doing the T-type style blood sugar for 2 weeks and you're not having big improvements, we're probably missing a deeper underlying cause.
Sure.
Like it is 9 out of 10 times brings radical improvements to headaches, to mood, to skin rashes, to fatigue, to brain fog, attention deficit. And I think it's wild because the body is so tricky because when your blood sugar drops at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, your brain panics. And it tells the adrenals, release adrenaline, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and cortisol, right? And where's your blood flow when you're getting chased by a mountain lion? It is away from the guts, right? And how are you going to feel? Nauseous. So when that blood sugar drops, people need to realize that the adrenaline and cortisol spike and you shunt blood flow away from the digestion.
And it doesn't go to the brain
And
either.
it doesn't go to the brain. It goes to the skeletal muscle. Fight, flight, or freeze.
Yes.
And they freeze and forget to eat breakfast. Right? And so I've seen that trick you do so many times. And you're like, trust me. This isn't my first rodeo. I love and appreciate your life. I want to see your life animated. And they follow your directive. And again, it's crazy about, even in a SIRS case, there's a tremendous reduction in their symptoms just because it's another problem. You don't just have chronic inflammatory responses from the moldy building. You also have fuel problems.
Right. And when people are going down that path of SIRS, so many foods can bother them.
Yeah.
So they get to this position of, well, I don't know what to eat. Yeah. And I feel sick when I eat this. I feel sick when I eat that. So coming up with a breakfast sometimes can be very difficult.
Yes.
So sorting that out, but then getting them eating that big breakfast can just really make all the difference.
And I think it's so great you said that because what you just triggered is how many people say I have histamine reactions to that or I have oxalate issues.
Yes.
And that's all real. There's reasonable data on all that.
Sure.
But a food sensitivity response, a histamine response, and a oxalate response, they look exactly like a blood sugar, like a hypoglycemia. They can. It does, and that's where the CGM can sort out a lot. And there's now one that the public can even use on their own, right?
Yeah, Dexcom has an over-the-counter. I think it's Stelo or Stelo.
Yeah, Stelo. Yeah. So Stelo, Freestyle Libre, and then the Stelo is the Dexcom. There's prescription, or you can get it yourself online for the same, and it's about $49 for a 2-week installment. I think Stelo does 2 for $100. And what our crew does is the patient will put that on for 2 weeks, and then the nutrition staff reviews the ups, downs, and all arounds.
Well, it's so interesting because you put on a CGM, you're looking at an app on your phone, and the app on the phone really just says, here's what your blood sugar is, here's where it's going down, it's going up. And so they're seeing in real time what's happening, and they're learning, oh, maybe I shouldn't, drink a sweetened lemonade on its own or something like that because of how big of a spike that they're getting. But they're not looking at overall patterns. They're not looking at what happened at breakfast, because they'll say, well, I had the same dinner and one day my blood sugar was fine, the next day it wasn't. But what they had for dinner, what they had for breakfast affected how that dinner acted on their CGM. And that's when the nutrition staff can really help give them a lot more information about how to avoid the lows at night. Because they're like, well, should I eat a bedtime snack? Well, maybe for a couple of days to get you out of that pattern. But the big thing is you need to eat breakfast. But they're not thinking that breakfast affects the whole rest of the day, including through the night. So then it kind of blows their mind a little bit. Oh, I have to look at a bigger picture here. And then exercise plays a role, stress plays a role, sleep plays a role. So there's a lot of variables that we need to look at. And
for that, just to really talk about the sleep issues, because then sleep issues turn into mood issues and on and on and on. But not eating breakfast as a T-type affects your sleep.
Absolutely.
Eating a big bacon and eggs breakfast as an A-type affects your sleep.
Yes.
And that's just such a amazing clinical pearl for people who have just like, who am I? With nutrition. Now, we'll say the coolest thing you guys do is so you get that data, you see the patterning, and then the second installment, the second 2 weeks, allows you to apply therapies. And being in grand rounds with our nutrition staff is mind-blowing. Melissa and Jennifer and Erin are 3 just juggernauts right now, and we have 2 more in training because it's just everyone needs nutrition support.
They do.
And you guys will come back and say, protein at bedtime wasn't holding her blood sugar. She needed half an avocado. So this person needed more fat at bedtime to stabilize blood sugar. This person needed more protein at dinner to stabilize blood sugar. And we never would have gotten the nitty-gritty details without the constant glucose monitor.
Right. And the partnership between nutrition and the practitioners is huge. So we had a G-type. Now, the G-type, their recommended breakfast is a bowl of seasonal fruit. If they're an athlete and they're really moving, maybe add some carbs to that, some starchy carbs. But they don't do fat and protein in the morning. Then, their light proteins do well with plant proteins, could do, salad with salmon on it or something for lunch, and then have their big meal of the day is dinner again. Again, lighter on the proteins, and as you pointed out earlier, light on the spice for the G-types. So we had a client that we were working with.
Chili chocolate. That is there. I said we got to chill out on that with the G-type the other day. You thought I was stealing her baby. It was, and it was like this book on the cravings. He just nailed it.
Yes.
But then 2 weeks into it, when they're starting to feel balanced, the craving goes away. It's amazing.
Either that or, you switch them to basil and oregano.
Right.
Things that are
Little
flavorful,
more, right,
but
flavorful.
not,
Not going to overdrive their gonadals to overexpress the body type they're trying to balance.
Right. So this particular case, she was CIRS. She had moved out of her home. She was living in a trailer. She had 2 huge dogs. They needed exercise because they're living in a trailer. So to not drive her partner and her crazy, she would get up in the morning and do a couple miles with the dogs and just kept complaining, the fruit and the oatmeal, the fruit and the carbs, it's not working for me. I can't function. I'm having more blood sugar issues throughout the day. So it looked like a person who needs more food at breakfast. And it would be really easy to cave and just say, okay, eat a bigger breakfast. But that's not going to support this G-type person's metabolism, digestion, and the rest of their day. And over time, with experimenting with a variety of what's going on here, Dr. Berkey discovered this is the adrenal support that this person needs. So when that adrenal support was not there, their own adrenals weren't able to hold that blood sugar, weren't able to partner with them in the diet that was right for them. So this is where in nutrition, we love the partnership that we get from the practitioners as well, because we get to see, here's the other piece, because it's not all about diet. It's not all diet and lifestyle. And that's, I think, where the patients are starting to get a window into their world as well with the CGMs and also the Keto Mojo meter. So when you've got a ketogenic diet, which the A types, the G types do, the excessive body types do better on either a keto or a carnivore diet and are running
with intermittent fasting.
With intermittent fasting,
They can't have a big steak for breakfast. It makes their metabolism stick in the mud.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you've got someone running on ketones, but what I started noticing is you were referring patients to me. They had been on a ketogenic or a carnivore diet for years, 2 years, hadn't lost a single pound. So what's going on there? So when we began requiring the Keto Mojo meter, that's when we could see this person is not getting into ketosis. So follow the fuel. What are we going to do to get this person providing enough ketones for themselves? And oftentimes with a ketogenic or with a carnivore diet, it's not enough fat because protein via
Gluconeogenesis.
Gluconeogenesis.
Yeah.
Via gluconeogenesis, they're turning their protein into carbohydrate, and that is taking them out of ketosis. So unless you're really dialed in on your carnivore or your ketogenic diet, it's not a high protein diet. So you need adequate protein, but you need quite a lot of fat to drive that ketosis.
You and I have talked about that as fuel purgatory, right? Your blood sugar, you're not running on glucose, but you also don't have enough ketones.
Right.
And now you're in the middle wondering, and you just don't have weight loss resistance without some level of fatigue. And I've really been explaining this to patients is if you're gaining weight, you are storing fuel, not burning fuel. And if you are losing weight, you're not only losing weight, you're going to feel more energy because the fuel is actually making it into the mitochondrial fire pit, getting burned into fuel. So you don't have inflammatory weight gain without fatigue. They just and it's a miserable. And then you feel kind of depressed about the inflammatory weight, So it's an evil, vicious cycle that can take out your self-esteem, and this is all doable, but the devil is in the details. And I agree with you. As the blood sugar queen, once we said, hey, let's also support your wisdom with a constant glucose monitor and the patient getting this biofeedback tool instantly where you can also pattern things for them and then do interventions. And interventions, I think the most we've ever had is 6 2-week installments of constant glucose monitors to get it dialed. But it was that attention to detail from the nutrition staff that took us there. And then tragically for our listeners, I don't drink that often. I was the party captain 30 years ago, but I can't do a Don Julio Blanco soda water, one shot, and not have my CGM crash to 55 in the middle of the night. It's the only thing that dramatically, and that's because alcohol is fermented sugar. Right? It's just sugar all. You can take all that. So I have a super exciting announcement for anyone going to SIRS-X. Erin is going to be talking about body typing, fuel, and the SIRS patient. And we really want the other providers who are serving those with SIRS to understand the body typing, because you get those little wins that give them the energy, the weight loss to do the big wins. The talk at SIRS-X, I think, is going to blow some people's minds, because when you're putting this all together for people, they're already feeling better before they even get going with deep dive into the Shoemaker protocol. I'm super, super, super
I
pumped.
do see it.
Yeah,
I do see it happening.
Yeah,
yes.
And you need every win when you're graduating chronic illness, right? When you go from that F to the D+,
Right.
It's like you can move out of suicidal ideations.
Yes.
Right? You go from the D+ to the C+, you can start moving out of depression and hopelessness and body aches and go for a walk. You can also say, okay, we got to find a good remediator. How are we going to vet him? And so there's just some energy to go around for the saga you have to go through to restore your health.
I really love it when people understand for themselves firsthand by seeing it in their own body how important food is.
Yeah.
We've lost that in this country in a big way, and throw chronic illness on top of it, and it just makes it impossible to think about, well, where am I going to get my buffalo and my high quality food, and I need to lower my food budget to pay for my home remediation. And so I really love it when people begin to partner with food and understand how much nourishment they can get out of their diet.
Yeah. Well, we're all unique individuals, but we also have these brilliant patternings from 5,000 years of Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine, ectomorph, mesomorph, endomorph, and cool things like Adrenal did in the 80s. And I am just grateful that you are our head of nutrition and you bring that biochemical diversity to each and every patient with love and gusto and experience, and give the small wins to the huge victories. We just love you.
Great. Thank you so much. The feeling is mutual. I love being here and supporting the patients.
Thanks, Erin.